Okay, so we're officially started here. So hello, thank you so much for joining. So today's webinar, it's in the spirit of Marie Kondo, right? This session is all about tidying up our circulation data. So during this webinar, we will be using web reports, Simply reports, and the Leapfine tool to help us identify data for cleanup. We're mostly focusing on patron data. So for each tool that we look at, I will give you concrete examples of data that you can tidy. And then in terms of our Simply reports and Leap sections, the examples we look at, they're also going to just kind of give us some general principles to apply in case you ever want to seek out your own tidying tasks. So this webinar is being recorded. It will be emailed out to anyone who registers. It's a small group, please do not hesitate to chat or unmute yourself if you want to ask questions. I did schedule this webinar through 11:30. I do not suspect we will need that full time. So we'll definitely have lots of times for questions. If there's anything you want to revisit or relook at, definitely have that built in. So to get started, Marie says she likes a mess. We do not, right? You hear how keeping data clean, it's important. You hear this from CCS. You probably hear it from your colleagues. And chances are you've probably said this to colleagues yourself. But why do we tidy? Why is it important for us to keep our data tidy? So in addition to things just kind of looking nice, there are some definite important reasons why we perform circulation data cleanup. The first thing is it ensures that we apply our circulation policies and rules accurately. So if you happen to attend or watch the recent patron registration webinar, you know that patron fields like the registered at branch and patron code impact things like access to e-content, eligibility for holds, checkout limits, loan periods, those types of circulation rules. Second, it ensures that we're gathering accurate statistics. Making sure we're applying data consistently means that we're also able to report consistently. And then finally, tidy data, it helps patrons and staff have better experiences, honestly. With tidy data, we can make sure that things like notices are delivered correctly, that there's no odd fines or fees on a patron's card, and that there's no unnecessary blocks on a patron's card. So our webinar is going to start off today by highlighting some web reports that's going to help us with tidying circulation data. Some of these will be familiar to you. Hopefully you'll learn one or two new ones that you can start to incorporate. Web reports is really the easiest place to start if we're looking for some small cleanup tasks. And the great thing about these reports is that the legwork is already done. So these reports are already looking for a specific condition that can be cleaned up, and they've already identified the patrons for you. So with these reports, all you really need to do is open the patron's record in Leap and find whatever condition we're focusing on. So if you're not familiar with web reports, you can find a link to web reports on the CCS website in the Member Tools A to Z page. And staff with a Rails L2 login can access and download reports from web reports, right? So if you can log into the CCS website, you'll use that same login for web reports. And here's a quick list of the reports we're going to look at today. So these reports all run regularly. The particular reports we're looking at today either run monthly or daily. And for these, cleanup is not going to take you a long time, especially if you keep at it regularly. So just a few minutes each month to check these out. In the first report we're going to look at is the patrons with no notification option report. So this report lists patrons registered to your library who do not have a notice delivery preference defined in the registration work form. If you've attended a recent training, you've probably already heard why this is an issue. Because if a patron's notification option is set to none, the patron will never receive notices. So this means they won't get an alert when holds are ready for pickup or when their items are overdue. And then in Polaris, notices and bill notice. Oh, I'm sorry. Did someone have a question? If you do, feel free to unmute yourself. So Polaris, in Polaris, probably heard before that like overdue notices and bill notices rely on a sequence. So like the patron is not going to get a second overdue notice if their first overdue notice was never generated. So in order for an item to then like flip to lost and a bill notice be generated, a patron has to have 3 overdue notices posted to their account. Now, if the patron does not have a notice option defined, the patron's overdue items will never flip to lost, basically. And so that is why, in a very quick nutshell, why it's important for them to have a notification option defined. So this report is located in the patron management section of web reports. It runs monthly. So I would say that generally this report is going to be pretty short for your library, especially if, after the initial cleanup. And as you can see from the screenshot of this report, it's a pretty simple report. It doesn't contain a lot of patron information, but this report does give you the patron barcode. So tidying the data, it's a very simple process. To tidy the data, you can copy and paste the patron's library card number into Leap to locate the record. You'll just open up their registration work form, and then you just need to modify their notification option. So for this, my recommendation is to check and see if the patron has an email address on file, because if so, you can change their notification option to email. Otherwise, if they do not have an email address on file, you can either set the notification option to phone or print if print is a more comfortable option for you. I would, this is pretty obvious, but I would avoid selecting anything related to text messages since you need to know the patron's carrier. The next report we have, it's another notice related report. I've got a chat. Let me just pause for a quick second here. Is there a way to make the notification options section required in order to register or save a patron's record in Leap? I'm going to check on that, Jasmine. I kind of want to say I don't think that is an option. And also another thing that complicates that for libraries who use online PAC registration, I believe it also gives patrons the option to select none themselves. Let me double check on that though. So for our next report, the invalid phone and or email address, this one is also a patron management report. This one runs daily. And even though it runs daily, even if a patron record isn't fixed, it will keep appearing on the daily reports until it is. So this report lists patrons whose phone number or email address are formatted incorrectly. So with these patrons, when an email or a phone notice is generated, it's likely going to error out. Now, thankfully, our errors are going to default the notice to print. So as long as your library is generating and mailing print notices, these patrons will still get notified, maybe just not in, as timely a manner and not by their preferred notice method. Now, in terms of defining what counts as invalid, this report cannot determine if there's a spelling error in the email address or like an incorrect digit in the phone number. Instead, what this report is doing, it's identifying users whose email addresses or phone numbers fall outside of a defined convention. So for email addresses, an email is considered invalid if it falls outside this set of rules. And these rules set format standardization. And then in terms of like a phone number, phone numbers that contain an inappropriate amount of digits will be flagged. And we'll see some examples of both like phone and email here. But here's a screenshot of what this report looks like with some fake invalid data. Now, in terms of email format, some of the big flags that the report looks for includes email syntax. So it's going to grab email addresses that don't use like the local part and at, and then the domain syntax. So this example here, my email, gmail.com. In this example, the address is missing the at symbol, and that's why it's being flagged. The report is also going to check what they call top level domains. And that's the part at the very end of our email address. So things like .com, .edu, .info. So if the report can identify an incorrect top-level domain, like in our example here, I have a .cpm instead of .com, the report can flag that as an invalid email address. And then finally, it's also going to check for things, non-permitted characters, like commas. I feel like commas are kind of the big one that you're going to see in the report. So if ever you see something like a Gmail, com instead of a .com, it's going to flag that email address. And then with phone numbers, the report will flag a phone number if it contains more or fewer than 10 digits. So like these are people that might have like a country code in their phone number because telephony automatically inserts that country code for us, or where staff have mistyped and added an extra digit or two in. Now this logic, I will say for phone numbers, this logic has been recently updated. It was previously looking for less than 10 or more than 11. Now it's just looking for numbers that have something different than 10 digits. It's also looking for phone 2 and phone 3 fields now if they're used with notices. So preparing for this training helped us identify some logic errors in our reports, and we have a little write-up going for the newsletter tomorrow. So those are just kind of some errors that are flagged in the report. I will say I myself learned what a top-level domain is when preparing for this this webinar. Now, for some patrons that appear in this report, you might be able to identify how to fix their contact information. So like, for example, with an email address like the .cpm, it's pretty apparent that I need to change the domain from .cpm to .com. And in this case, I can access the patron's record and I can confidently make that update myself. Now, for other situations, especially things like phone numbers. Oh, yes, is there a question? Okay. For things like phone numbers where like you might not be able to fix it without verifying the information with the patron first. So in these cases, the best thing to do is to open the patron's record in Leap and add a block or note to verify the patron information. So in the clip here, we're adding a library assigned block of invalid phone number. So this block might stop them at the self-check and prevent renewals based on your library's block settings, but adding a block will ensure staff intervention. The other option to add a note's not going to pop at staff at checkout. So, notes can be less visible, but it won't interfere with circulation in the patron. So I would say it's up to your library, which you want to add to the patron account. One other thing I wanted to note with this report, let me just kind of go back real quick to where we see, sorry about all the clips. Now, if you have patrons with like international phone numbers in their account, I think this is rare, but if you have like a university in your service area, you'll likely see this. Just know these users will be flagged as invalid phone numbers, but since it's an international number, it's valid for them, right? So in these cases, you'll just need to leave the numbers as is and know the report will likely always include those international number patrons. Okay. Let me pause real quick just in case, see if there are any other questions. So our next report, it's going to look at patrons with deposits or credits. So unlike the other reports, this one is located in the financial reports section of web reports. Now, both deposits and credits are types of account transactions that can appear in a patron's record. So a deposit occurs when a patron pays in excess of what they owe. These typically come from online payments. So like when a patron pays in your library's, like your Smart Pay portal, if a patron clicks submit twice, like if the page is loading and they click submit again to try to hurry it along, Comprise will take both payments from the patron and consider the excess as like a prepayment or a deposit for future fees. And then in the patron's account summary, you will see a transaction entry of deposit. And so here's a screenshot of what it looks like in the patron's record. So we see the deposit listed under the type, and then the note is payment via third-party credit card. And that tells us that the deposit was created through the online payment portal. Now, a credit, on the other hand, a credit occurs when a lost and paid item is returned and staff select the option to credit the fee. So this shows that the patron owes the money, or the library owes the patron the money, but the library hasn't refunded it yet. So in the patron's account summary, you will see the transaction type as credit. And it's also going to show a negative balance to indicate that the library owes the patron this amount. So we don't like deposits or credits on patrons' account because these not only cause confusion for both patrons and staff when looking at their account, but they can also cause issues during a financial audit. So we've disabled the ability to create deposits and credits wherever we could, but we're unable to disable the option in some places like you saw with check-in. So there's still ways these can get on patrons' accounts. Thankfully, I would say it's a very rare occurrence. So we do have a web report available to identify these patrons. Now this report runs daily, and just like our last report, the records will kind of accumulate on them. So if the patrons has a deposit on their account today and it isn't removed, it will appear on the report tomorrow. But what's different about this report is that it's a system level report. So all libraries look at the same report. Patrons from all libraries are included here. So here's kind of a snapshot of what this report looks like. So it's broken down into two tabs. So the first tab lists the patrons with deposits, and the second tab lists the patrons with credits. And we're going to start out with clearing our credits today, since that is surprisingly the easier process. So you do not need special permissions to remove a credit, so this cleanup can be performed by staff with just general permissions. I'm going to show you a short video clip of the process. So in the patron's record, we're in their account tab, and you'll look for the credit entry, select the check boxes next to the credit, and at this point, you'll see you have the option to click the refund credit button. And then once you confirmed, the credit will be removed. So basically what we've done here is null the credit out. Two steps for how to do this are available on our website. The URL is listed here on the slide. It should also be listed in the agenda too. Just finish the clip. And then here are the steps written out on this slide. So again, to remove a credit, you want to check the report for patrons registered to your library. The report gives the patrons barcode, right? So you can just easily locate them in Leap by copy and pasting that number. And again, you go into their account tab to look for any entries with the type of credit, select the checkboxes next to the credit entry, and then click the refund credit button.
Can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
So do we assume that by saying refund credits that we are actually giving the money back to the patron, or is that really up to the libraries and we're just getting rid of this because it doesn't look good on the report?
That's a good question. So from CCS's end, all we care about are getting rid of the credits in the database, because that, like I said, that causes problems when it comes to like audits. In terms of the library, like you said, Michelle, like it's up to you if it fits in within your policy to like pursue giving the patron back the money, or if you're like, okay, this time frame is out of my refund window, we're just going to null the credit out. So beyond the actual action of like getting rid of the refund and Leap, that's up to your library.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Diego, this is Kim. I have one quick question.
Yeah.
Because we have patrons who do e-receipts, is it wise to turn off the e-receipt option, like checking that box before you do the credit, so the patron's gets the email that the credit's there? Does that make sense?
It does. Part of me wants to say that this isn't going to trigger an e-receipt. I'm going to check on that, and I will send an update with answers to the questions when I email out the link to the recording. So stay tuned for an answer on that.
Okay.
I'm just going to make sure I write down that question there.
And perhaps I missed it. You had also mentioned that CCS kind of prevented as many opportunities to give credit. If, let's say, you check in a lost item that's been paid for, is credit still an option?
Unfortunately, it is. That
Okay.
I think is like the one area we weren't able to disable the credit option.
Okay, yeah, because I had one come up that was credited from another library. They had credited it on the report, so I just went in and fixed it. But I just wondered, maybe that's something we can talk about as a group at our next CERC meeting.
Yeah, we can definitely send out a reminder to everyone to not use credit.
Thanks.
So the other part of this report is removing deposits. Deposits are a little trickier. So weirdly enough, at this time, actions for removing deposits are not yet available in Leap. They're only available in the staff client. In terms of permissions, staff in the circulation managers group have the ability to remove deposits. So in terms of this cleanup, you need a staff client and you need circulation manager permissions. So this is what, let me show you another clip here. This is what the process looks like in the client from the patron status view. So you will click into the account tab, which is a $ icon. You'll right click on the entry for the deposit and then click return. Now, like with the credit, you'll just be prompted to approve the deposit return. So, it's thankfully a pretty straightforward process. It's just very much a different viewpoint because we're all so used to looking at Leap and not the staff client. So for these step-by-step instructions, along with a video, are available on the how-to section of the CCS website. I've got the URL should be in the agenda. And then here's a step-by-step on this slide. So for this, you're going to want to clean up transactions where your library is a payment library. This report, you'll notice that in the deposit tab of the report, it sorts patrons by transaction library. And this ties in with step 7. So again, you're going to locate a patron in the client by searching in the patron status find tool. You can search the patron by barcode. And then in the patron status view, you'll click on the account tab, which is the $ icon. Right-click the deposit entry and select return, which should be in bold. Confirm the return and to mark the deposit as returned. Now, you'll see step 7 is bolded out. There's one important additional step here for deposit. So remember we said earlier, deposits are usually created when a patron overpays on line and Comprise. So you'll want to make sure that Comprise returns the money to the patron's credit card, right? So you'll also need to refund the patron through Comprise. Each library has their own Comprise account and access to administrative portal. There should be instructions in there on refunding. Unfortunately, I do not have access to those. So this is why, again, the report lists patrons in the deposit tab by payment library or transaction library. So the library who received the payment can give the money back. So I would say the credits and deposits are kind of like the scariest cleanup in terms of the web reports. Next, we're going to look at some more simple ones, more fun ones, if you will. We're going to look at a report titled Patron Library, Patron Code, Patron RBP Code, Prefix Mismatch. So it's quite a mouthful of a title. You can find this report in the Patron Management section of Web Reports. And this is another daily report where the records will appear on the report each day until they are fixed. So this cleanup report looks at patrons whose settings contradict one another. And what we mean by that is, like, for example, if a user is registered to your library, but it has maybe a reciprocal code or an ILL RB code assigned with a different library. Now, one thing you'll notice here with this report, there are a lot of tabs. Each tab looks at or compares specific data points. So while this leads to more tabs to go through, it also shows you like specifically what needs to be fixed, instead of like listing all patrons together and then you need to like look at the record to figure out what data fields to focus on. Thankfully, each tab will tell you specifically what to look at. So with this report, you can take it one tab at a time. Like I said, focus on those specific fields. So like in our screenshot, we are looking at the Your Library, Not Your Patron Code tab. And per the description, these are users registered to your library, but their patron code indicates they may have a different home library. So for tidying these, I can use the barcode listed in the report to locate each patron in Leap. And by looking at their information, which can include other registration fields like their address, for example, I can determine what I need to fix. So in this case, I can determine the patron is a reciprocal borrower and their registered at branch should be set to CCSB instead of my own library's branch. Now, another thing about this report, there are a couple tabs related to patron barcode. So this report uses your library's card prefix to identify users with potentially invalid barcodes. And we typically see barcodes being flagged for like 3 big reasons. One, it's an in-house card or a special card that uses an atypical number, in which case, let's consider that number valid. Or the user is a non-CCS reciprocal borrower, has a barcode from a different home library, but was mistakenly registered as a local patron, right? So like their barcode prefix doesn't match up with your library's barcode prefix. And the third reason you can see is if the barcode was scanned incorrectly or like an item barcode was scanned in the patron's barcode field. So for some of these situations, you may need to verify the card number before with the patron before fixing anything in Leap. And then I will also say, finally, because there's so many tabs and this report is only comparing 2 fields at a time, don't be surprised if you encounter the same patron on multiple tabs based on how the patron was registered, right? So they may pop up on like your library, not your barcode tab, and also the your library, not your RBP ILL tab. And the final report in web reports, now this one is a less traditional report in that it's not an Excel report. You know, it can't download the report as an Excel spreadsheet. So we're going to look at the monthly record counts by patron characteristics, which is found in the statistics section of web reports. This report, it's also a monthly report, so it updates on the 1st of every month. And what this tool does is it takes patrons registered to your library and it sorts them based on certain patron record characteristics. And you'll see things like patron code, statistical class, the ILLRB library code, and even patron notice delivery option. So while it was mostly designed for gathering statistics, right? So you can see like how many of your patrons use email reports versus how many use phone reports. It's also a really helpful tool for cleanup. Now, when you click the report heading to open this tool, you'll see viewing options on the left-hand side of the screen. So this is what you see when you first open the tool up. And let's look for patron code and statistical class today. So when I click on this view, this is what we end up seeing. So what the tool does, it takes all of our patrons and it sorts them based on the selected characteristics. So in our case, in the view here, we're sorting on the patron code and statistical class together. So here we have every combination of patron code and stat class in use by our patrons and a number of how many patrons use that combination. So in my screenshot here, I can see that I have 14 patrons who have a patron code of MJK Educational and a stat class of school. And what's really cool here is you can click on any one of these entries to view a list of individual patron records that use that combination of values. So one thing with this, the list can only support like a couple thousand patrons. So for your larger groups, like your patron, MJK patron code and resident stat class group, you're not going to be able to see a full list of patron records. But this tool is great for patron record cleanup because it lets you easily spot those outlier fields, right? And that's usually a flag that there's some patron records that could have data to fix. So for example, here, we have users, these are users registered to our library. So, anytime I see reciprocal values in that list, it's a flag to me that I probably have some records to clean up since they should be assigned to branch CCSB. And then because of how this tool is set up, I can click on those entries to get a list of specific patron records to look at. And from there, the tidy process is going to look really familiar. Copy and paste that barcode from the listen to Leap, open up the record. You can look at, check out what's going on, check out their address, the other data fields, and fix whatever fields you're focusing on. So in this case, I will change the registered at branch to CCSB. Now, before we go on from this report, I want to show you one quick thing with the notice delivery option view. So this view breaks down your patrons by how their notices are delivered. So earlier in the session, we discussed cleaning up patrons that have a delivery option of none. You can also identify these patrons using this tool. So the delivery option count will give you patrons whose delivery option is blank. So these are, again, patrons who don't have a delivery option defined. So again, you can click that entry for blank, see what patrons do not have a delivery option defined, and clean them up like we saw before. So that's another thing with web reports. A lot of times you have multiple ways to identify patrons for cleanup. So that wraps up the web reports section. Next, we're going to look at some possibilities for using Simply reports to identify data. I'm going to pause just for a second here and see if there is any questions coming through. Okay, let's continue on. So with web reports, the data has already been identified and compiled for you, whereas with Simply reports, let's be honest, there's a little more legwork involved since you have to build the report. However, if you have a project to work on or part of the database, like an aspect of the database to look at that's not featured in web reports, Simply reports gives you another avenue to gather that data. So staff do need separate Simply reports permissions to access the application and build reports, which CCS staff can set up for you. And another thing to note about Simply reports is that the reports will reflect the data as it currently exists in the database. So while some web reports run on certain days of the week or only monthly, Simply reports data is of the moment. Now, when we think of cleanup report with Simply reports, many times what we're looking for are two parts of a record, two aspects of a record that contradict one another, kind of like when we were looking at those mismatch reports in web reports. And this is how we identify possible areas for cleanup. So when presented with a data cleanup problem or question and trying to figure out how to translate that into a Simply report, think about how you can use filters and output display to show you that contradiction. And we're going to build 3 sample cleanup reports together that focus on looking for these contradictions. So in our first report, we're going to look for patrons with a collection agency block, but whose records don't meet those block conditions. So for this example, we're going to pretend like we submit patrons to collections, and we just want to make sure that the collection agency block has been removed from all patrons who have cleared their accounts. So we're again going to look for patrons with a collection agency block, but who do not owe any money. Now, if you're familiar with Simply reports, you know that there are a lot of different report types that you can build. For this particular report, we are going to build a patron list report because I'm looking for patrons and I want each qualifying patron listed separately in my spreadsheet. So to build reports, excuse me, we need to set up both the output, which is the information that will be displayed in our report. That's this top section here. and our filters, which is how we identify who we want to see in our report. And that's this bottom section here. So I'm going to select the output information first. Again, this is the information I want to see about the patron records in my report. There's no right or wrong answers for output. With this, you're going to want to select what information you need to see. So for this example, I'm going to select a few things like a barcode and the patron name. And that's just going to help me identify who the patron is. And then I'm also going to select an option that shows that they've cleared their account. In this case, I'm going to select the option patron account charges, because that's going to show me how much money the patron currently owes on their account. So after that, we're going to set up our filters, which will tell the report what kinds of patrons to look for, right? Which patrons are eligible to be in our report. This is where we can set up our contradicting values. So for our report, we want to find patrons registered to our library. That's really going to be a consistent filter throughout all of our reports. We want to filter to patrons who do not currently owe money, but who do have a collection agency block on their card. So we're going to look for these three filters, apply these qualifications to our report. So our first filter is to define which library these users come from. And we will use the patron branch filter in this first section here to limit to our users. So I'll just select that checkbox, select my library from the list. So next we want to filter to patrons who have a collections block but have cleared their accounts, right? So we know we need a filter for each of those qualities. Next, let's look at the patron miscellaneous filters section. So one filter here allows you to specify charges or how much the patron owes on their account. And we can use this to limit to patrons who have zero balance by changing the filter option to less than or equal to and entering 0 in the amount field. And then we'll go to the block and note filter section to add our final filter. So we're currently filtering to patrons who don't own a balance on their card, but we want to add a block filter so we can pick out the patrons who still have that collections block. Now there's different types of blocks, so you might have to like play around to pick out the block you're looking for. In our case here, the collections block is a system block. So I'm going to select the system block checkbox, and I will select the patron account has been submitted to collection agency from that list. Now, when we click submit here, the report is going to apply our filters to generate a list of patrons belonging to our library who owe no fees but have a collection block. So there's a couple things we need to do here. The first thing is we need to remove the block. Now, there's a special way to remove a collections block. So if you've ever tried removing it from the actual like block section in a patron's account, you've probably found that, hey, it just comes back the next day. So here's the secret, right? With a collections block, in their account view, account tab, there's a different view called collection agency. And that is where it permanently removes the collections block from Polaris. So you'll want to go into there and click remove. So let's watch that again. So I'm going into the account tab. I'm changing the view from account summary to collection agency. And then I will click remove to remove the patron. So staff do need to be part of the circulation manager's permission group to remove this block. We have documentation and a video on our how-to page if you do want some step-by-step instructions. That's not the end of tidying though for this. A confirmation pop-up will appear And a note will say your collection agency will need to be informed. And you'll see this anytime you manually remove a collections block. So when manually removing a block, you need to inform unique management that the block has been removed. So again, we've got some instructions online on how to remove the block.
Mieko,
Yes.
this is Michelle. So we don't have a collection agency. So if one of our patrons has something from another library, are we to just leave that information as is?
So here's the thing. This is probably going to go a little deeper than you were hoping for, Michelle. Patrons are submitted to collections based on their home library. So if Displays does not participate in collections, your patrons will not be submitted. Now, if there's a situation where like you run into, if you used to submit to collections and you no longer, like your library no longer submits to collections, if the patron clears up their bills in Polaris, since you're not sending information back and forth to Unique through the database, then yes, you will still need to reach out and let them know that this patron has squared away.
Okay. I think we did collections like more than 10 years ago.
Okay.
So I don't think any of that information is still in here, but I'm having like a memory of occasionally somebody having like a $10 collection charged to their card from like maybe Niles or another library. And I always thought I can't do anything with this because Niles already paid that $10 to Unique. And so does that sound right?
Yeah, okay. I want to check on a few things. Back when we were on Cersei, and I have like no memory of Cersei, unfortunately, at this point. Let me check about this from back on the Cersei days. I'm just
Okay,
gonna make
so
a note
maybe
on
that's
that.
just from Cersei stuff that I'm seeing, that I've seen, yeah.
And then we'll so yeah, let me check on that, and then I'll check on the best way to take care of those.
Thank you.
That's a good question. Okay. Okay, great, got my note down. So that was our first Simply Report example. I'm going to do another cleanup report, again with a block. This time, though, instead of using two filters to identify who needs to be cleaned up, we're going to use our output sort to help us out. So for this example, we're looking for children, so like patrons under the age of 18 who have the library assigned block, birth date and or parent guardian info needed, but who do have parent guardian information already in their records. So these are probably users where like staff were able to get the parent guardian info, but didn't get a chance to remove the block. So we're just going to identify these patrons and remove the block for them. So this is going to be another patron list report because, again, I want each qualifying patron listed separately in my report. For this, we're going to use the output. We want to see about the patron, barcode, name. And for this example, I'm also going to add the patron birth date and the patron guardian field so we can see what's written in that field. Once we have our output set up, we're going to think about those filters. So with these cleanup reports, again, we want to limit to patrons registered to our library. Our report is looking for kids, right? So we need some kind of like birth date filter to limit to patrons under the age of 18. And we also want to just look at patrons that have that particular block on their card. But we want to see users if they already have data in that parent guardian field. And there's a question mark there because I'm not sure if the filter is going to allow us to limit based on data present. So let's start entering our filters and see what we have here. Now, just like in the previous report, we're going to add that patron branch filter under the patron general filters section. So I can limit to patrons belonging to my library. And then Simply Reports comes with several ways to filter by dates. In the patron date filters section, we'll find a birth date filter. So with this filter, we need to enter specific dates. So select the filter to activate, and then you'll have to do, a little math to enter in the start date and then today's date. So once this is entered in, we'll be filtering to users younger than 18. And then next, we're going to look at those patron block and note filters again. Since the block that we're looking at now is manually added by staff, we're going to look at the library assigned blocks to select that filter. So now we're limiting to users who have that block on their account. And then finally, we want to find patrons who have data in the parent guardian field. So if you expand the user defined fields section, this is where you'll see filters related to the patron's attributes, including parent guardian. Now we see here that this field gives us the option of limiting to patrons who don't have data in that field. There's a not present checkbox. Or it asks us to search for text within that field. However, one thing we seemingly can't do here is search for users with any text in this field. So in this case, what happens if we don't have a filter available to us? So one thing we can do here is make use of that output and sort options. So going back up to our output options selections, we do have access again to that parent guardian output. And if we sort, with this, if the patron has data in that field, we're going to see it in our report output. And then if we sort by parent guardian, the report is going to group anyone that has data in that field together in our output. So our report is going to give us a list of all patrons under the age of 18 from our library with parent guardian info needed block. And by sorting, we can easily focus on users with data in that field, and we can ignore the rest of the patrons who legitimately have that block in place. So this is what the report looks like when it's sorted and downloaded. So in the report, we can go right to the users with parent guardian data. So, there's a lot blurred out in this screenshot. Hopefully it gives a sense of the sort. So we can automatically bypass the lines where that user one or that parent guardian data field is blank. And we can just look at people who actually do have data in that field. So with this, we copy and paste their barcodes into Leap. We'll double check that there's data present in the parent guardian field, and then we can delete that block. So now these patrons can use their card without worrying about running into any block barriers. Okay. For our final Simply Report cleanup, we're going to look at a fee-focused report. So we're again using Simply Reports to look at opposing values to identify our cleanup. Now, Simply Reports can be helpful for fee-related reporting, but these types of reports can also be really intimidating. So we're going to walk through an example. Hopefully, you become a little more familiar with some of our filter options. For this cleanup, we are going to look for patrons who have replacement costs or processing fees from our library on their cards for available items belonging to our library. So, sometimes a patron returns a billed item, it can be checked in and the charge is left as is. Maybe the bill is too old to be waived by the library's automated recovery settings, or maybe the replacement cost was waived, but we missed the processing fee. So this report will give you a list of replacement costs and, if relevant, processing fee charges currently on patrons' accounts, again, for items that are currently available. And then with this report, we can check the shelves, verify these items are here, and clear those fees off the patrons' cards. Now, unlike the other reports, this one is dealing with fines and fees. So we will run a patron account report. And then in my report, I still want to see a list of each fee. So I will be running a patron account list report. Now, when running a patron account report, the first thing that you want to tell Simply Reports is what kind of transaction type you're running a report on. So are we looking for current charges or charges that the patron still owes on their card? Or are we looking for a transaction summary, which are fees that the patron has already paid? In this example, since we're focusing on current fees, we're going to leave the transaction type set to charges. And then with output, there are a lot of ways to see information about the fee. So output with a prefix of account is going to give us info about the fee. So like we want to see things like the account reason or the account transaction balance. And the account fee reason is going to tell me if it's a processing charge or replacement cost. Account transaction balance is going to tell me how much the patron still owes on that fee. There's also output that have prefix of item and mark, and that's going to give information about the item that's linked to the fee. So for this report, we want enough information to identify the item. I'm going to choose things like item barcode, item call number, and we'll get the mark title in there. So this way, when I send someone to check the shelves before waiving fees, they can check for the correct copy. And then finally, any prefix with the, any output with the prefix of patron is going to give you information about the patron record that's linked to the fee. So we definitely want to be able to find the patron records in Leap. We'll add at least the patron barcode and the patron name. You can add more if you'd like. And then you just need to arrange the output list in your preferred order. Now for the filters. So with patron account reports, there are three main categories of filters. Ones that allow us to filter based on fee qualities, which are these patron account or transaction date. Ones that allow us to filter based on item qualities, which are no surprise found under item filters. And then finally, ones that allow us to filter based on patron qualities, which are the filter groups that start with patron. So our report is going to look for replacement or processing fees, posted by our library, unavailable items belonging to our library. And we're using that set just so we can stick to the most straightforward types of transactions. So let's open up the patron account general filters. Patron account filters are filters that, again, allow us to filter based on fee qualities. And here we see the option to filter based on fee reason. So this is where we can tell Simply Reports look for fees with reasons of processing charges and replacement costs. And quick tip if you're not familiar, if you hold down the Control key, you can select multiple options from a list. So also in the patron account general filter section is a transacting branch filter. We'll apply this filter as well, which will allow us to limit fees applied by our library. So those are our first couple filters. The next thing we need to do is add filters that limit to items belonging to our library and items that are available. Now, since these are both item qualities, we're going to look under the item filters section. We'll use the assign branch filter to limit to items from our library. And then we will use the circ status filter to limit to items with an available circulation status. So with that, our filters are in place. We have our output options selected. When we submit, and we can view and download the results. So with that, there's a list of available items from our library that have unpaid replacement and processing fees associated with them. And then, like I said before, we can check the shelves for these items, make sure the copy is truly available, and then waive the fee from the patron's account to clear it off. So those are just a few examples of how you can use Simply Reports to identify potential database cleanup. And as we saw with these reports, we can use filters, output, and the output sort to look for pieces of data that contradict one another. And from that, identify areas for cleanup. So before I move into our final section, I'm just going to pause and check chat again, see if there's any questions. So our final section, we're going to look at the Leapfine tool to support our data cleanup. Some of what we see in web reports or in Simply Reports can also be done in the Leapfine tool. You're getting the same information just in a different way. So with the Leapfine tool, we're configuring and customizing our own searches. And then also with the Leapfine tool, there's no special permissions are needed. Anyone with general permissions can use it to search. And then just like with Simply Reports, the data here is current because we're searching our actual database. So, we don't have to wait for a web report to run. We are looking at data as it exists. So my intent with these last two examples is to highlight a couple of different search methods to use in the Leapfine tool for cleanup. So we're going to do two searches today. Our first example is going to look at how to identify users with incorrect patron characteristics that need to be cleaned up. So we've kind of seen this theme several times in web reports. Now, during the web reports section, we looked at things like those patron mismatch reports, and these helped us to identify patrons who, again, have contradicting information. So an incorrect registered at branch or patron code assigned. And we can easily look at the same thing in the Leapfine tool. And with this method, we can target any area of our patron characteristics. Since we're setting up a search on our own, instead of using the predefined terms in a report, we can basically look for any contradicting information we want to. So let's figure out what we're going to take a look at today. So we first need to identify what fields we want to clean up. In today's example, we're going to search for patrons registered to our library, but have a patron code of CPL patron. So these will likely be users where we need to update their registered at branch to be CCSB. So they're not counted as local patrons of ours. And then once we know what we're going to focus on, we can create that search in the Leapfine tool. So based on our search prompt, we know we need to limit both by the user's registered library and the patron code, right? Those are the contradicting elements that we're looking for. So let's get this set up. Add the first qualifier. Doesn't matter which one. I'll make this the registered at branch. So from this, I'll select patrons registered library, and I will select my branch or branches if part of a multi-branch library. And then next, we'll select our second qualifier by clicking the funnel icon at the end of the search bar. And this is where we can add additional conditions. And here I can add my second condition of patron code. And this is where I can tell the Find tool specifically look for CPL patron code. And then finally, I just need to click apply, and then I can launch my search. So My results list will be a set of patrons that match both qualifications. If it's a short list, it's easy for me to click into an individual record, check out their information, and update their registered at branch. If it's a longer list, you can also save those users to a record set and then just come and go to the record set as you have time. And if you're not familiar with record sets, I absolutely encourage you to check out record set documentation on our website. They are my favorite thing of Leap. So again, it's a really simple cleanup. You don't have to set up a very involved search. You're looking just comparing two elements together. So it's nice and quick. And then for our final example, I want to demonstrate how you can use one of the Leap wildcard characters in the Find tool to aid with data cleanup. So here we're going to use the Find tool to locate patrons with a US country code in their phone numbers. So as we heard about earlier in the session, this is a cleanup task because telephony likes numbers formatted with 10 digits. It automatically inserts the country code itself. So having a country code in the number just kind of duplicates efforts. So for this cleanup, we're just going to identify patrons with the country code and remove that digit. This is the same concept as that invalid email and phone web report, but we can also locate these patrons using the Find tool. So what's different with this than many searches we do in Leap is that we don't have specific numbers or patrons that we're searching for. We're basically just want anyone with a 1 in front of the area code. And this is where wildcard characters are going to come into play. Leap has a couple different wildcard characters. These do slightly different things. The most commonly used wildcard character is an asterisk. And with this wildcard, you can search part of a word or a phrase, or in our case, a phone number, and then enter the wildcard, which tells Leap to fill in the rest. So this is kind of an example of what it does. If we search run with the wildcard, the Find tool is going to search for the term run, runner, running. So let's see what this looks like in terms of our cleanup. We'll again open up our Find tool, and we're going to change up the Find tool to search phone numbers. The nice thing about the Leapfine tool, it's searching all 3 phone numbers simultaneously. Now for this search, we need to set our search relation. So this is where it says keyword all. Keyword searches are not going to be effective here because keyword is basically going to look for the number 1 anywhere in a phone number. It's going to bring back a lot of results. Instead, if we want to tell the Find tool to look for a 1 at the beginning of a phone field, we need to tell it to do an exact search. This way, it's looking exactly for what we type. So again, change that keyword all to an exact search. I'll just wait for my clip to catch up with me. And then we'll enter what we're searching for, which is a 1, which is the country code, and the wildcard. So the Find tool will fill in the rest. So then next, just like our other cleanup activities, we want to focus on patrons from our library. So we'll add in an additional filter and use the registered at qualifier or patrons registered library to limit to patrons registered to our location. Now, when we search, we find patrons who have a US country code in one of the fields. To finish tidying, we can open up the record and go to the registration field, to their phone area, and then just remove the 1. And this way they are set up to remove phone calls from telephony if ever it's needed. So I wanted to show you that search method where you type in the asterisk, um, but there's an even faster way to search for these patrons in the Find tool. So let's go back to where we changed our keyword search to an exact search. Some of you may have noticed that there is an exact asterisk search option. This option automatically adds in the asterisk or the wildcard for you. So in this example, all you need to do is type in a 1, and the Find tool will search the exact same way and look for any phone number that begins with a 1. So those were just a couple quick examples of some search methods that you can use to help identify patron records for cleanup using the Leapfine tool. So those were all the examples and the reports that I wanted to show you today for our tidying up your circulation data session. So you've seen a number of data cleanup tasks that you and your colleagues can do using resources like our web reports, our Simply reports, and even the Leapfine tool. So I hope you did see some new opportunities for cleanup and maybe have picked up some methods for using Simply reports and the Find tool in case you ever want to create your own cleanup tasks. So again, the session is being recorded. Once the recording is ready, I'll send it out to everyone through the L2 website. I will include answers to any still pending questions, whatever I can find about those still pending questions that we have. And you should also see a link to the recording in an upcoming issue of CCS News. So as always, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to email help@ccslib.org. Feel free to email me directly. And with that, I'm going to stop the recording so you can go forth and tidy. I will stick around for any other questions that you may have.